Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for his kind words and for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the rule and the underlying legislation. As has been made clear, we're actually talking about two different pieces of legislation here today. The waiver for Secretary-designate James Mattis is, quite frankly, a no-brainer. The Senate voted 81-17 in favor of that waiver. I would suspect there'll be similar bipartisan support here. My friend's correct, of course, it's a serious matter whenever we grant exceptions to the law, but General Mattis is just uniformly and universally respected across the lines for his distinguished work in defense of this country, so I hope we move ahead on that. The budget resolution that comes before us is another matter, and there will be a great deal of contention. Frankly, the resolution itself is not, as my good friend from Georgia pointed out, and should not be seen as a traditional budgetary item. It's frankly a projection of what will happen if we do absolutely nothing over the next decade and leave the current set of policies in place. It's a sobering document to read in that regard, because it shows rising deficits every single year for a decade, beginning at over $580 billion and then moving well north of $1 trillion. And frankly, in my view, it's something that we ought to look at and come to the realization that we're going to need to do entitlement reform in the next decade, something that people on both sides of the aisle seem to want to ignore. But absent that, we will indeed have extraordinary budget deficits, and they'll be large enough to undercut and undermine our economy. But the budget resolution is also a vehicle, a tool, to begin to repeal the Affordable Care Act. This is necessary for really one simple reason. The Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare as it's popularly known, is a failing system. It's unpopular. It's never been popular. Never hit 50% of popularity. Frankly, in my view, it's cost our friends their majority in the House, then cost them their majority in the Senate. It may well have cost them the presidency of the United States. The American people have spoken pretty emphatically, we don't like this product. And it's collapsing financially right now. This is not a system that's an operation that's really doing well. Let me just talk about my own state. We have about 197,000 people that have gotten insurance under Obamacare. This year, they will have exactly one choice as to what company they want to choose to provide them, and their rates will go up by 69%. Now, nationally, I think the average is over 25%, but clearly, this is not a system that is working very well. Politically, the easy thing to do would be what our friends want us to do. Let's just leave it alone. It'll fall under its own weight. It'll be very clear who's responsible for that collapse, the current administration and my friends on the other side. But that also would be the irresponsible thing to do, and that would be in itself an abdication of leadership and ultimately unfair to the American people. Instead, we're going to repeal the system and begin to replace it with something that will work better. Now, my friend's point is a fair one. There's not a single plan out there, but there are plenty of plans. I know I co-sponsor a couple myself, and I think we'll be able to work through this relatively easily. There's been a lot of discussion and a lot of diagnosis about what the failures of Obamacare are, but there's been very little in the way of actual legislative remedy. We have a unique opportunity to do that. Frankly, I'm proud of our Speaker. I'm proud of our conference that they're going to seize that and begin this process, because I don't think there's anything more important facing us. So I would urge the passage of the rule and then the passage, obviously, of the underlying legislation, particularly the budget resolution that allows us to begin the necessary work in repealing and replacing Obamacare, and obviously the waiver that would allow us to have a distinguished Secretary of Defense, General Mattis. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.